going on an adventure is fun, thrilling, and empowering. It can also be challenging with difficult days. But I have yet to meet anyone who hasn't gotten the adventure travel bug after going on their first adventure. To date, I've covered over 150 adventures from around the world where you can hike, bike, paddle, and/or horseback ride as a way to explore cool landscapes and cultures. Each adventure is not only unique, but it's also unique for each person. If you replicate any of the adventures covered on the Active Travel Adventures podcast, you will have a distinct experience. Thus, I don't mind and actually think it's cool to cover again experiences that we've done before on this show because everybody's experience is different. I want you to hear that different take that ADA listeners have taken to more broadly fill out your knowledge of given trips so you get a better understanding as to whether this would be an exciting adventure for you to go on. Today, we return to the biologically diverse and strikingly beautiful Costa Rica to walk across the country, actually the continent, on the new 175-mile Costa Rica Camino. I did the Costa Rica Camino with fellow ADA listeners last year. Our experience was completely different from Conchita's, one of the founders of this magnificent trail that we covered a few years before. And on today's show, we learn how Laurie and her husband's hike was a complete 180 from either Conchita or my experience. Yet all of us had an exceptional adventure for our own reasons. Each telling adds its own insights. And before we get started today, I want to let you know that we are looking for one solo male roommate to join us on our Portuguese Camino in April of 2025. So if you know somebody, spread the word, please. And now, I can't wait to share with you Laurie's experience. So let's get started. Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks. One thing I love about doing this show is meeting fellow adventurers and learning about new places to add to my ever-expanding list of adventures to go on. I also love hearing from listeners who have actually gone on an adventure because of this podcast. I mean, that really rocks my boat. At the end of the program, we'll be talking to Tom, an ADA listener who went on the Costa Rica Camino because of this podcast. I'd love to share that with you. And if you've gone on an adventure because of this podcast, reach out to me at kit@activetraveladventures.com. I'd love to hear from you and showcase you as well on the show. So be sure to listen to the end to hear inspiration from Tom and also some of my takeaways from today's interview. And with that, let's get on with the show, speaking with Laurie about her Costa Rica Camino. I've asked Laurie to come on the program to tell us about her Costa Rica Camino that she did last year. Welcome to the program, Laurie. Thanks for coming on.
Gosh, thanks so much, Kit. I appreciate the opportunity.
You had mentioned in our correspondence that this was an amazing adventure travel trip for you. Had you done anything similar or adventure travels in the past? Or walk us through how you ended up going on this Costa Rica Camino.
Sure. So yes, I had done quite a few adventure travel trips. Actually, for the past few years prior to this, I had done some trips with my siblings. So we had these sibling trips going. And the first one we did was in Honduras, which was a 10-day whitewater rafting camping. And I absolutely got the bug because when I finished that, I really felt like it was the greatest accomplishment that I had ever had. And the feeling was just so amazing. We did a short, it wasn't a Camino, but we went to Guatemala and we did, it was called Trek Guatemala, and it was a 5-day glamping trek. And that was really the first serious hiking that I had done. The way I found out about the Camino was actually a friend of mine who I had stayed with in Ecuador. I think my second or third time to Ecuador. He runs an inn in Mindo and had sent me a link to, I think it was National Geographic, had done the top 10 adventure travel things. And of course, one of them was in Ecuador, and that's what he was trying to highlight for me. But my eyes went right to the El Camino de Costa Rica. And as I started to research it, I came upon your posts and your podcasts, and I listened to a lot of different, or read a lot of different things about it, listened to your podcast, and just became so increasingly interested in doing it that we just made it happen.
Yeah, it sounds cool. So, and we had written back and forth, and I believe you had heard about Juancho from my program, and I was like, you got to get Juancho with Eurotrek, who has since become one of my affiliates too. So I should put in a plug for them. that if you go with Eurotrek, mention Active Travel Adventures, use the promo code ADA100 and they'll knock $100 off your trip for you. So anyway, so you went with Wancho and Eurotrek. Tell me how all that went and tell us a little bit about, you did your Camino a little bit different than we did ours the year before. Tell us about how you came to do it your way.
Sure. Well, first, I do want to thank you for, I don't know that you necessarily were putting a plug in for Eurotrek, but because that's who you had gone with and you were pleased with that, I can tell you that even before I had gotten that communication from you, I had probably spent 6 months conversing with a lot of the different companies, and I'm sure they're all great. But, as you've probably experienced in all of your travels, you got to find the one that works best for you. And it's not only the company or tour group that works best for you, but it's also the person. And I've been really fortunate that in all of the travels that we've had and done, I really only had one guide and group that I didn't connect with. And it makes a big difference. So leading up to it, we did our research. And I thank you for the recommendation of Wancho, because we absolutely clicked. I knew before we even hit the ground that we were going to have an amazing experience. My husband and I decided that we wanted to do it solo. At first, we were planning on joining a group like you did, but we were in our late 50s and had really never done anything like this. And I had some fears about being able to handle it, keep up with a group. What if we were paired with a group that they were amazing, intense hikers, and we were, keeping them back. And on the flip side, to be honest, I knew the way that we commit to things, that we were going to be in shape and as ready as we could be. And I also didn't want to get with a group that held us back. So we knew it would cost more, but we decided to go that route. And that way we could also more handpick the types of accommodations. And that's not a standard part of these tours. They don't necessarily communicate about that. But my husband is 6'2", and not that that's gigantic by any means, but we have been in situations where the sleeping arrangements have really affected him because of his size, and also just noise and snoring. And so we wanted private, quiet places, because we felt that the best way that we could handle this hike would be to be healthy and to be well rested. And we were.
And that makes sense. And I want to backtrack too. You and I know about this Costa Rica Camino, but for anybody that's not familiar with it, this is literally only a few-year-old trail that Conchita, and I'll ask you if you met her a little bit later, and some of her friends, local Ticos or Costa Ricans, who were heavy hikers, had done the Camino in Spain, said, hey, why don't we do something like that in Costa Rica? But instead of just walking across the country, which is what you do, you start in the Caribbean and you go all the way to the Pacific, they wove this path through these small villages that virtually receive no tourism and have brought industry and income into mainly the local housewives, giving them, they feed us, they house us, they take care of different things that we might need along the way. And we're helping all these little small businesses pop up. And it's been amazing, because I think it started right before COVID. And I think to date, 1,000 people have yet to complete the whole thing.
That is right. I do remember that they were approximating 500 people had completed it. And actually, I'll mention something. We had already had a trip planned for last year with my siblings. And I remember the title to my email to my brother was "Your Blessings, Please." And I decided that I wanted to skip the trip with them and instead do the Camino, for the very reason that I knew it was going to grow. I knew it was going to become busy, and I knew it would change. And it would change in the positive for some people, but for us, we really wanted to do it in its infancy stages, where the infrastructure was still kind of being worked out, and where we could definitely do smaller family stays and have that kind of experience. So we're glad. Well, we did it also because we figured 1 year later, 1 year older,
Exactly. And you never know. I mean, a knee could go out, a hip could go out, who knows at our age what could happen. And this is 145 miles, and it's a difficult hike. I mean, you're going, I think the total elevation gain is like 19,000 feet up and down, because you're going over the continent. So you're going up the continental divide and then back down. And there's some pretty steep parts, but you just take your time and to get to the steep part.
That's exactly right.
We never felt pressured to kill ourselves. I mean, we would go slow and steady on some of those really steep inclines. And a lot of times, just looking at the views, and I think I took almost 2,000 photos. I mean, the landscape is unbelievable. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that and some of the things that you saw?
Well, I think that was one of the highlights of the experience for us was the incredible change in not only temperatures, but landscape. It really just blew my mind. Most of the travel we've done before, you had some variations, but nothing like what we had. So, of course, both coasts, it was flatter, but it was absolutely hotter and more humid. Coming from Florida and having trained for almost a year in Florida, that part of it was, I would say, easier for us than perhaps for others, but it still was difficult. But then moving from the banana plantations up into the rainforest and up into the indigenous territory and mud, but then dry pavement. And it's hard to explain how varied the whole experience is. You can't get bored. You can't, around every corner, there was a spectacular new sight for us. People were so welcoming along the way. I remember a group of bikers had stopped at one point in time and they were all having snacks and they walked over and gave us some bananas and gave us some water. To be honest, we didn't need it, but of course we took it and it was just such a kind gesture.
And these were locals, or who were these bikers?
These were locals, yes. One of the parts that we were in, it was evidently used on Sundays, and we happened to be there on a Sunday for the big biking groups. And they have races and sometimes just join-ups. And that's what was happening. These groups were going back and forth and back and forth. And so every once in a while, we'd pass one of their resting points. And that's when they shared the banana and water.
Yeah, and Ticos, as I said, the Costa Ricans call themselves Ticos, are known for their friendliness and all that. And like you said, you're going through so many ecosystems. Costa Rica is one of the most biodiverse in the entire world. And they believe it's because the two continents are meeting there. And it just has, and plus you have all this different elevation gain. It's incredible the amount of wildlife and the flora and the flowers and the orchids and just everything. It's just amazing.
Yes. And having someone like a Wancho who literally is an encyclopedia of flora and fauna, we learned so much. I would have loved to have had a tape recorder so that at night I could go back and write down all the things that he pointed out to us. It didn't stick with me, all of it, but just the experience of having someone like him was amazing. And back to the climate and elevation, I do remember the days where, and I know you mentioned this, you were covering your head with wet bandanas to keep your head cool. And then I remember getting up to Cerro Alto and my husband, I took a picture and I texted it and sent it to Wancho because I knew he'd laugh. He had his hat on, he had his little booties on, he was under the blanket. So, I mean, you're talking about intense change in weather.
Indeed. And even every time I go in the mountains too, I always carry a thermal puffy jacket as well as the raincoat. And I would say for this trip, because of the heat and humidity, to also get either a regular umbrella, lightweight, or get a backpack umbrella. And I'll put a link in the show notes. Sharon, who is with my group, she had the backpack one, and it's really helpful to keep that sun off.
We ordered that from your link with the suggested purchases. That was so helpful because that was our Christmas list to my family, and we virtually got everything. So one of them was this umbrella.
Yeah, no, that sun is brutal. It can be brutal.
Absolutely. We used them while we were training here in Florida too. And also what came in handy, we probably only wore them 3 or 4 days, but the guards, the boot guards that came up to our knees, and really what that did on the muddy or wet days was just to keep from that wet going down into the boots, which of course can then create blisters.
Correct. And in that indigenous area, which is the most rugged, I would say, of the whole trail, ours was rainy and muddy, and that certainly would have come in handy there.
Yes, and that was one of the days that we had beautiful weather going through the indigenous territory, but regardless, there were still muddy sections.
Right. And I want to mention too, so while technically you do not need a guide for any place other than the indigenous area, it's not really well marked except at the stages. There are blue and white blazes sometimes. So until the trail gets more developed, you really do need to go with a guide, I would say. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I would absolutely agree with that. But again, I think it takes doing some research to make sure that you're paired with a company or a person that matches you. And so the communication ahead of time is really important. But even perhaps more so, I think because the accommodations, there really isn't anything like what you have in Spain, where you can go to websites and you can find and book places to stay. That hasn't been set up yet. So for that reason, also having places to stay and know where to stay. And for those who are interested, for sure the homestays, I'm not sure how you could do that without having the involvement or help of one of the groups that takes you through.
Right. And until I didn't know that was even an option to do the homestays, but not just the lodging, which sometimes you're camping as it is right now, although you were able to do the homestays. Sometimes it's lodges, but in some of these little villages, there's not a restaurant. So if it's not prearranged, you're not going to eat lunch. So all of these things are, I'm sure, if you're listening to this in 2040 or, decades from now, this will all be worked out. But right now, this is all very, very new. And it takes a lot of spinning plates to come together to put this trip together for you.
Absolutely. And on top of that, if you were to have an injury in most of the areas, you could probably find your way to help. But having a company that's checking in on you and knowing where you are and if you need help for anything, that's important too.
Right. And expecting you.
Correct.
So I did it in 16 days and we did the Pequari River rafting trip. Did you do, how many days did you do? Did you do any extra add-ons or tell us about that?
Yes. So we also did the quote unquote 16-day, but we actually hiked for 13 of those. What happened, we did the Pequari River rafting, and that was one of our extra days. And we also did the spa day in the thermal pools, which actually ended up being fantastic. I don't think we did either of them to give ourselves a break as much as they just both looked interesting and something that we would enjoy. And then we decided to double up. I really wanted to spend some time in the Esquipulus. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, but the Esquipulus rainforest. So we doubled in days, I'm going to say 13 and 14, so that we could have a free day, so to speak, at the rainforest. And the owner took us up into the jungle there. I guess it would be considered a jungle, but onto his land. I don't know how many hectares he had. And that was a great experience. And we hiked to a waterfall that I know some of the others do when they stay there. But it just was really neat to be one-on-one with him and to spend the afternoon hiking like that and to have the morning kind of free to ourselves.
Now, did you also get to go to the hydrangea farm or that yoga retreat?
So we did stay at the yoga retreat and Verdesana Lodge, I believe it's called.
Mm-hmm.
Unbelievable place. We were the only people there, so we didn't end up actually doing yoga. What an amazing place that is. And for anyone who's thinking of going, make sure you stay at Verdesana. I think it is part of the regular stay.
By fluke, they just opened right by the Camino.
Okay.
But now they're working together.
The food there was unbelievable. We actually played some games with the owner and with Mancho, and we had the afternoon to walk the grounds, which were just unreal as well. We did not visit the hydrangea farm. We walked past and through the area, but we didn't actually go to the farm.
So if somebody has the opportunity, it's not I had a plant nursery, so I had these visions of pots of hydrangeas the way I would grow them in my nursery. These were terraced hillsides just covered in hydrangeas that were in full bloom while we were there. And I would recommend, if somebody has the opportunity and the time, to take that detour and have the lunch there. They've set up a little place, and that was amazing.
Yes, 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 yes. Agreed.
They've created, like, that was one of the good things that Conchita and her team have done, is they've gone into these villages and say, what can you offer these tourists? And they're coming up with things.
Absolutely. Not everyone will want to do the whitewater rafting, but it is a fantastic experience, and it is a break from the hiking. And while you do expend a lot of energy, don't get me wrong, it's not the heaviness on the legs and the feet that you get from the hiking.
Yeah, and I would make a note that, so I've done that Pacori River 3 times. It's considered one of the top 10 most beautiful day rafting trips in the world, and it is beautiful.
It is beautiful.
But I didn't have enough sunscreen on my legs, and I got burnt, and I think that affected my next day, which was my hardest day.
I remember listening. I listened twice to your podcast, and I was nervous about that next day based on what you had.
Oh, I had a terrible, terrible next day. And how was that day for you? So this, just so you know what we're talking about, is I was like, oh my God, I've arranged this trip and I'm not going to be able to do it. I about died, and somehow the body recovered, but it was the longest hike of my life that day. And I don't even think it was that long, maybe 16 miles, but I was not doing well at all. So fearing it based on my show, how did you do?
I hate to say this because I don't want to sound like I'm bragging. We kicked it. We kicked it, Kit. We didn't have a day which I had fully expected. Every single thing that I read said, be prepared to, at some point in time, say, what did I do? Why am I taking this paid vacation to do this? I expected blisters. I did expect, some kind of minor injury. I definitely had expected or prepared for, maybe not expected, some intestinal issue at some point in time. These are all story of my life. And by the grace of God, or just from sheer, I guess, the training that we did, neither one of us encountered anything, not once. And we both were just so overcome with emotion when we realized that this trip, I don't want to call it a trip, but this amazing experience was coming to an end. We were so sad, yet we were so proud and happy that we had spent literally a year training for it. So you cannot underestimate the importance of preparing yourself, not only physically, but mentally. And I think mentally we had prepared ourselves for the worst, and physically, no question that we had done everything we could within our power, given that we lived in flat Florida and we worked full time. That put a damper on it, but we committed ourselves to at least 5 to 6 days a week, pretty much doing something in terms of training.
And you're the poster child for proper training. That makes all the difference. The only time I personally was ever so well trained was when I was going to do my first 2-week backpacking trip. And I was an Amazon woman because I was terrified.
Yep.
I was like, can I do this? And so I think it helps to go in there with just a little bit of twitchiness so that you do over prepare, because then you enjoy it so much more and you don't have the likelihood of a day like that day that I had. And to be fair, most trips, most people have one day that's really hard on them.
No question.
The good thing is just to have it not all happen to be the same day for everybody. So you kind of rotate around who's having a bad day for whatever reason. It could be a lack of sleep, or, you put your sock on with a little bit of a bending and you're getting a little hot spot, whatever the case may be. But training is the key. If you train well, that makes such a big difference.
Yes. Again, I can say that probably changed the trip for us, and we weren't prepared for other trips. I mean, for sure, when we did the hike in Guatemala, I mean, that's part of it, is that I went with my brother and sister who were not in as good shape even without the training, and we did no training, and didn't have hiking sticks. And I mean, the way it was described was we were just going to be kind of walking through fields. Let me tell you, it was tough. So you better believe, yeah, we went in with some apprehension. I mean, I can't even tell you, the night before, and perhaps, you experienced this too. That very first night, you're up because you're thinking, gosh, what am I going to encounter the next day?
Exactly. So, and when you're starting in the Caribbean, and then you actually have to take a boat a little bit to get to the real official start, because you put your feet in the water in the Caribbean, then you take the boat to get over by the Pequary Reserve before you really start the hiking. So what was it like? So you're excited. Tell us about the lodge, or tell us a little bit about what you remember of that.
I guess if we were going to be fearful, that probably would have been a really great place to start, because that first day, while it wasn't bad, it certainly wasn't a highlight. When we arrived, it was pouring. So we went by boat in pouring rain with our bags exposed. And so we arrived at Julio Knight's home, where he has cabins, and we were soaking wet. We were shown to our cabin, and it was perfectly fine, with the exception that it was really hot, really humid, really hot. And of course, I don't know if you stayed there, but there were these little crabs everywhere. And I'm pretty cool with stuff because of our travels. But I mean, there were hundreds of these little crabs. And when we went down to have a snack and actually have a beverage, a beer, we came back and I had left my bag open and I had crabs in my bag.
Oh no. Wait, I didn't have the crabs when I was there, so it must be a seasonal thing. Are these like fiddler crabs or like crabs?
They're tiny little crabs. I don't know that they're called the fiddler's crabs. I mean, the fiddler's crabs that I'm thinking of that we saw, for example, in Brazil, they were quite large. These were just tiny little things. But they could get up on the bed and they could go across the pillow, and they they were everywhere. Anyways.
That's exciting. So this brings us to the weather then. That is definitely seasonal, because I didn't have that at all. What month did you go?
We went in July.
July. Okay. So you're in the rainy season. That would explain that. Now, Conchita, who is one of the founders of this trail, had said that it's often like a 2-week perfect window of weather in July. Did you get any of that?
We actually had perfect weather. And that's why I said the first day was a little bit of a scare, because that was the only night that we were really hot. We were very hot that night. Somehow we managed to sleep. And that was we only had one other day that we really had any substantial rain. And so, no, the weather was perfect. We had rain in the reserve. And then we had a couple of afternoons where, just as we were getting close to the end of the day and to our accommodations, we would have some rain, a couple overnight, but we didn't really have to hike at all, like all day in the rain, except for the day that we were under canopy in the jungles.
And I think that might even technically be a rainforest, which would explain the rain, because we had rain almost the whole day that day too. And even if you go in the wet season, it's not necessarily like torrential rain all day long. It's going to rain sometime during the day, and during the dry season, not as much.
Yeah, it's really not something I get now, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, Kit, that we obsess about the weather for these kinds of trips, when in reality, when you get there, it just doesn't matter. It just didn't matter. You go with it. There's so much happening around you that the weather is so secondary.
Exactly. And also, just make sure you have the right gear, and it doesn't make a difference either.
Exactly. Layers.
Layers and good rain gear and good sun protection. The only month you can't do this, or it's not recommended, is November, because it's at the end of the rainy season. Just things are just too muddy and wet. But other than that, you can go year round. The busiest season is going to be December through March, I believe.
Correct.
And then it starts slowing down. The wildlife is going to be more active in the green season during the summer season. So if you want to see the wildlife, that would lean you more towards going in the summer months. But pretty much you can go any time of year outside of November.
Absolutely.
And the temperatures don't change that much. In Fahrenheit, it's in the high 70s to the high 90s, depending on what elevation you are. You're too close to the equator for it to vary that much.
That's right. Yep. And socks. You mentioned proper gear and socks, of course, they're important.
Yeah, and if you go to the website, I have a packing list there that I recommend, and I would recommend just getting my regular checklist anyway before you go on any adventure trip, just to make sure you don't forget something important. Whether you need it for each individual one, you can make that decision, but at least you'll have a checklist to make sure you don't forget something important. And I would recommend poles for the indigenous. I don't think for the rest of the time you really need it outside of for rhythm, but in that indigenous section, I think poles are necessary.
To be honest, we use them every day, and I think it was.
I do too.
We even here in Florida, we use them on the flat ground, and part of it is, I think yes, there's a bit of it is rhythm, but also you just don't know if you ever need them. Whether it could be a cow, it could be a snake, it could be so, or you encounter high grass, and so for us, we use them to put them in front of us and to clear any high grass. And we can bang them or make noises if we want to scare away an animal. So
that's a good point. That's a very good point. Let's see. And you did something very unusual too, because this was not just an adventure tour. This was also an emotional tour for you. Do you mind sharing that story with us?
No, yes, it was, the timing was good. It was great. And it was bad. We had lost my father 2 years prior, and the wounds were still wide open. And he was probably responsible for the four of us kids being adventure travelers because he loved the outdoors. He loved nature. This would have been something that he would have just loved. So I made the decision to take a little urn with his ashes and bring him along. And I didn't tell anyone except for my husband that I was even going to do this. And we decided when we got there that I was going to take the urn out and we would just say our own little moment of silence at each of the markers, because for those who haven't done this or haven't researched it, there are 16 stages, and at each stage there is a marker. And so we took a picture then, and in the end I was able to share that with the family, and it was really a very special experience for me to have him along with me, at least spiritually. At the same time, probably 3 months before we headed out on the Camino, my mother had been diagnosed with cancer, and we didn't know at the time initially how serious it was. And probably 6 weeks before the Camino, we understood that it was stage 4, and she was going to decline chemotherapy. And so, of course, we were going to postpone or cancel the Camino over her dead body. Or her exact words, "You will be going on this Camino." And I'm so glad I did, because for anyone who has been the primary caretaker of someone who's losing their life, you need a lot of strength. And this Camino, the time that we had to be able to just clear our heads and gain that strength, it was amazing. So yes, it was an emotional time for us in many ways.
Very powerful story, and I appreciate you sharing that with us. And you also did something it was just you and your husband and Wancho, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, we went private with just.
So that gives you a lot of couple time.
Yeah, it was wonderful for the two of us. That was, I kind of broke the whole Camino down into the highlights for us. And one of the highlights for us was that we got to do this as a couple. We do spend a lot of time like most couples do, but have you ever just walked for 16 days and had a chance to? It's funny because I would find that we'd go for a while and no one would say anything. And all of a sudden somebody would start talking, and then we'd start sharing, and then we'd walk a little bit farther. We'd reflect a little bit on that, and then we'd share more. And at the time, I think partly because of losing my dad and then knowing that my mom was terminal, we were really struggling with our future, timing of retirement. And so we had a lot of clarity as a result of this time that we had, and made some big decisions about our life and our future through this Camino. It's amazing what can happen. They say the Camino provides. I heard that. I get that now. The Camino really provided for us in so many ways.
Did you learn new things about each other that, I don't know how long you've been together, but were you surprised about some things that you found out about each other?
That's a really interesting question. Of course, I can't answer for him. I'm not sure what he would say. I would say that he was the happiest that I've ever seen. I mean, he is a generally very happy, mild-mannered, easygoing person. But during our training, I was definitely the sergeant. And he would become very frustrated because he wanted to cut back. He wanted to stop early. He's on his feet during the day. I'm not. I have an office job. So he would, of course, come home a lot more exhausted than I would. But what really amazed me, and I think it amazed him, was how much once he got there, he didn't mind it. Training is different than being there. Training is just, it's so routine and it gets so old. But once he was there and doing it, he was great. And I think what really surprised me was that when you're training and it's hot, I mean, literally we were training in Florida in 96-degree temperature with, I don't know, 80% humidity. And so there were times when we would get frustrated, either with each other's pace or whatever it was. But on the Camino, that didn't happen. It really was like we just both let go and we both let things happen and we both didn't let things bother us. And so it was wonderful. I guess what surprised me was honestly that we didn't spar, we didn't spat, and we don't typically a lot, but I figured under those conditions where you're pushing your body to the limit, the first person you lash out at when you're getting tired or when you're frustrated or when you hurt it's your spouse.
That's interesting perspective. I'll have to ask the couples that were on my Camino that same question sometime when I chat with them, which I think is interesting too. I still keep up with them. And it's just such a bonding experience. So if ever you do another Camino or do this type of a thing it's pretty intense. It's hard.
It really is. Yeah.
I mean, it's not a walk in the park. This is a challenging thing. You could do any of this for a day. It's getting up the next day and then the next day and then the next day. It's hard on your body and it can be hard mentally. But there's so many things to look at. Like you said, there's always something interesting to see or do.
Absolutely. And then, of course, there's the people that you meet along the way. And for us, that was a great part of it because most days, I think the latest we finished might have been 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. There was one of the days we finished by 11:30. So most days we would get to wherever it was that we were staying and we would have the balance of the afternoon to do whatever. And usually we did rest a little bit, but honestly, and this was probably one of the things that surprised me, we ended up out for walks or hikes most of the afternoons, depending on where we were.
I don't want to run on too long today because I still want to introduce you to Tom and I want to go through my takeaways. So I'm going to break this into a 2-part episode. The second part will be available immediately if you would like to download it from the website activetraveladventures.com. Otherwise, if you subscribe to the podcast, you will get it automatically in 2 weeks. So here, let me start with my takeaways, and then we'll go into a brief chat with Tom, who did the Costa Rica Camino because of this podcast. I've got a couple takeaways I'd like to share from today's show. 1, the importance of training. I cannot emphasize enough that your enjoyment of your adventure is often a direct relationship to your training. You want to have energy at the end of the day, not just be glad that you made it or survived it. Training also reduces the chance of injury and thus also adds to your pleasure. If you don't know how to train, you can check out my training episodes. I'll put links in the show notes. You can also reach out to Becky at Trailblazer Wellness as my affiliate. She'll give you a 10% discount off of a custom online training program suited for you and your adventure using the equipment you already have. Cannot more highly recommend working with Becky if you're the least bit skittish about how do I get started? What do I do? She offers my listeners a free initial phone consultation to see if you're a good fit. In addition, if you do want to do the Costa Rica Camino, Eurotrek is my recommended affiliate for doing this trail. With Eurotrek, you can use my exclusive promo code ATA100, ATA100, and that'll save you $100 off if you're doing a full Camino hike. Now let's talk about gear. I would recommend downloading my packing list, and I think that's actually a really nice checklist just for going on adventures anyway to make sure you don't forget something important. And based on Laurie's recommendations, I have added to the list gaiters. I don't often use them, but there's times like on that day going through the indigenous territory, it is muddy. I think, like I said, I believe that was in the rainforest, so even if you don't get rain on your day, it's probably going to be muddy when you go. And for sun, I want to emphasize the backpack umbrella is tremendously helpful on this Camino. You are often out on exposed trail, and that sun can be just beat down on you, and it will make your life so much more comfortable. And another thing that I remembered after we recorded, when I went to Haiti, I don't know, like a decade ago, they had recommended, since we were staying, I was on a mission trip, and we were staying in maybe hostels. It wasn't a place with air conditioning, and it was really, really hot. So they had recommended that we bring a battery-operated fan. So I've added one of these to the checklist. So if you've got problems sleeping in the heat, this might be a good thing to consider bringing. The batteries are super heavy, so you only want to bring this if somebody's going to be transferring your luggage every day because you do not want to carry that weight in your pack. I think it had like 4 or 6 D batteries, as I recall. In addition, if you go on a homestay, I love Laurie's idea of bringing Left, Right, Center, a game I'd never heard of, but what a great way to have a cultural exchange with people you can't even speak the same language. So I put a link to that in the show notes as well. Also, I checked with Conchita about homestays, and on certain stages, that is a possibility either to stay with a family or in a cottage on their property. So if that's something you're interested in, just check with your tour provider. And I should mention the links on the packing list are my affiliate Amazon links. This means that at no additional cost to you, that if you enter the Amazon website using any of my links, whatever you buy, whether it's something that you clicked on or not from my site, I will get credit for that sale. And like I said, it doesn't cost you anything, and it helps to support this program and to keep it ad-free, which all of us very much appreciate. I mentioned that I rafted the Pequary 3 times, and each time I did it in the dry season, Laurie went in the wet season, and her experience was far more gnarly, or as they call, spicy. And so you may need to do a lot more homework before you decide to go rafting the Pequary. The Pequary River is generally class 3, class 4, which is exciting, but you don't die kind of rapids. But in the rainy season, I would imagine it might get into class 4, class 5, which can be a little bit more dicey or spicy and potentially more dangerous. So you want to make sure, A, that you're going with an excellent tour operator that has superior safety consciousness, and B, you may want to reconsider if you're going to be going on the Pequary in the rainy season. It may not be your best bet. So I just wanted to give you a heads up on that so you can do a little bit more research. Rafting the Pequary, of course, is an add-on activity to take an off day and not part of the Costa Rica Camino, but you do cross the Pequary on your trip, so it's super convenient, and it is one of the top 10 most beautiful day rafting trips in the world. And so if you're into rafting or the water at all, and you're there in a safe time of year, definitely add this on. It is so much fun. And now let's take the last 5 minutes to talk to Tom about his Costa Rica Camino that he did because of this podcast. I've asked Tom to come on the show because as a listener to the program, he has taken the steps to actually go on some of the adventures that we cover on the show. So welcome to the program, Tom. Thanks for coming on.
Great to be here. Nice to talk to you finally.
So how did you first discover the program altogether? How'd you discover Active Travel Adventures?
I'm not exactly sure, but somehow I think it was through Facebook. I found a post of yours somehow of what you did in Costa Rica, the El Camino de Costa Rica. And I felt, well, that looks interesting. That looks like something I'd do because it's it's not too long. It's a great place to be. And I found your website and I contacted you and you sent me all the information to prepare for it. I used your information. I used the travel guide, the Uri Trek that you recommended, and went there and did it, had a great time.
That's great. And you did this with your wife or a significant other, or?
I did it with my wife, right? We did it a year ago. We did it February last year.
That's so cool. But had you all done anything like this before?
No, it was the first time. We've done a lot of hiking. We've done a lot of traveling, but this is the first time we ventured out into like a multi-day. I wouldn't say it's a backpacking because they do transfer your luggage, but it's still every day you got to get up, you got to hike. Some days were tough. And you did the hike, so So yeah, it was our first time.
And it's not a baby hike. It's 175 miles. So it's a long way.
Yeah. But the accommodations are great. The food is great. Everything about it, how you laid everything out, the detail was spot on. So there were no issues.
Oh, great. So let me ask you, did you get the bug for adventure travel?
Yes, I did. Absolutely. It bit me and bit me hard. Then I went to your website some more and I found you were doing this trip in the El Camino in San Diego. And it looked like, well, it's a short, 75, 80 miles, 15 days. It's on the coast. So initially I signed up to go with you. You were going to go this year. So when you changed it to next year, we decided that it fit into our schedule this year. So we booked it for this year.
So yeah, I can't wait to hear from you how you do it. Yeah, because we're going April about this time next year as we're recording this. So it's a beautiful time of year to do the Camino. And I think that's terrific that you guys are now into adventure travel. And I'm glad that the program is helping you to do that.
Yep. Absolutely. So I'm looking at your trip. I know you're going to the Mont Blanc. Aren't you doing something there? And
yes. So I'm in my training now for that.
Yeah, I looked at that. Yeah, so
there's still space available.
I signed up. We were there in Switzerland last year, but we didn't get a chance to do that. So I keep, looking at your different adventures on there. And once we get this one through, then I'll probably look at something else that you've done. Your ideas of adventure fit into my ideas of adventure. So it's just easy for me to go to your website and find what you did and just copy it.
I would like to let people know that I've not been to the website. I've just heard us just over the podcast. I've spent a lot of time. In fact, I'm redoing the website right now to make it even more user-friendly so that whatever you feel like doing, whether it's hiking, biking, paddling, and now horseback riding, you can plug that in. Whatever month you can go. If April's your month, see what's available in April, whatever continent you want to go to. So that way you can find the thing that best suits you. So I'm trying to make it very user-friendly to encourage people to get out there and go on adventures.
Yeah, I don't know if I ever really have to do much research on my own. I just go to your information and I'm sure I'll find something that fits. And hopefully one day we'll be on the same trek together. So
that would be great. Well, mentioning that, so I'm now tentatively putting together a Bhutan trip for fall of 2025.
Yeah, I saw that.
And Bhutan ranks, I think I've been around 50 countries right now.
Yeah.
The most unusual place I've ever been to.
Well, that's because I was in Nepal 3 times.
Uh-huh.
I did 3 different treks in Nepal. So that Bhutan that's very interesting to me. So I may have to look at that as well.
And Bhutan, because it's surrounded by the Himalayas, it's never been conquered. So they have a very homogenized society, unlike a lot that were on the trade routes that brought in the different cultures. They are the same as they've been for centuries. It's very, very unique. And now they're allowing tourists. It's probably going to change. So sooner rather than later is the time to go to Bhutan, in my opinion.
Yes, I agree.
Anyway, so what words of advice would you give to anybody that's on the fence about whether they themselves could go on an adventure?
I would just say start small, start with something, that's relatively depends on your physical conditioning. My wife and I are in really good shape. So, some of these stuff that takes a little bit more physical activity are not so difficult for us, but it would be based on your physical level. But, find something that's within your physical range and just do it. Don't be afraid. It's my experience has been when you travel to other countries, they're very modern, very safe, very easy to get around. Some people are skeptical of traveling outside the US, but there's no reason to be afraid of that.
I couldn't agree more. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your insights and the fact that the program is helping you and your wife to get out there and have some fun.
Yep, absolutely.
Terrific. I look forward to hearing about how your Camino goes. Please let us know.
I will.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Kit.
I sure hope you've enjoyed crossing Costa Rica on the new Costa Rica Camino. Remember, you can always reach out to me at kit@activetraveladventures.com if you have any questions, comments, suggestions. I love to hear from you. It's our way to make this a two-way conversation. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, this is Kit Parks. Adventure on!